Hello everyone and welcome to another tutorial, and this time we'll be talking about Mash. So Mash is quite cool. It's the new system in Maya to create motion graphics, something very similar to what you're seeing here. It's procedural based, it uses instances, and it's really fun to use, and it's very powerful. In this tutorial, we will be just looking at the basics and covering what we can use this for, such as procedural modeling. We can also do animations with this, as you can see right now, and even some rigging. So with that being said, let's just jump into it and get familiar with the concepts for Mash. Alright, so unlike other videos where I have these pretty much scripted, this is, I'm kind of going to do off the cuff, so bear with me. Alright, so let's start off with the first concept that we need to understand, and that's the concept of instances. So in Maya, when we create an object, we basically, Maya, for example, in this case a cube, let me just get rid of all of that. What Maya does is creates vertices and then looks at where they are in space, and after 3 vertices it creates a face. So it creates a polygon surface. After 4 vertices it basically can create a quad surface, and then we'll just go around and create all of these surfaces, creating basically a mesh network. All right, simple, basic stuff. Now what happens when we duplicate an object, such as I've done right now, and move it out like so? I've basically created a duplication of those vertices, but I created new vertices. So Maya goes and draws out and calculates each one of these vertices anew, like basically from scratch. All right. But Maya also knows how to do something really cool, and that's to create something called an instance object. So instead of going ahead and duplicating the vertices and redrawing them and recalculating them, what it does, if I now go and duplicate this as an instance, so I'm going to go to Edit, Duplicate, Special, and turn that into an instance and duplicate. All right, I'm going to pull this out. It looks exactly the same as before, but there is a live connection between these two, because what Maya has done is take a snapshot of these UVs, put that snapshot under a new transform node, so I can move it to anywhere in space. But if I now grab any one of these vertices, there's a live connection between the two. Now Maya only calculates these vertices once, and then looks at where the snapshot of that vertex is in space in regards to that transformation node. So I think we can see a different representation of that in the node editor. So just hold on a second, and we're going to do input outputs. So we should, I grab these 2 meshes and bring them in, you will see that I have one shape, but in this case, right, one shape, it's now 2 shapes, but in this case I have 2 transform nodes. Now if here it seems to have drawn out, you know, other shapes like shape 1 and shape 2, but there's really just one shape. Okay, because this is just a snapshot of that shape. So this will be the representation of that shape in the node editor. All right, let's close that. We can grab an object and then break that connection by going to modify, convert, and then go to where it says here instance to object. And that now will basically record whatever the vertices are. We'll rebuild those vertices. So what we're going to use this for is basically if you need to duplicate a whole lot of objects and not have Maya calculate this over and over and over again, we can actually use these instances quite efficiently. So I'm going to stop this section here, and when we come back I'll actually show you how Mesh kind of uses instances in a very cool manner. So Alright, so in the previous section we looked at what are instances. Now let's see what we can do with them. So as I've shown you in Maya, we can go ahead and duplicate using duplicate special to create those instances. So we go to duplicate, duplicate special, go into its properties, change it from copy to instance, and then we can use this to create many copies. But basically what it's going to do is it's very limited in how we are going to control these instances. So I'm going to leave this at default. I'm just going to reset everything and close that. But we can use the Mesh or Mash network to propagate these in space. We'll look at propagation of objects more fully towards the end of this tutorial, but for now let's just see how we can use Mesh to kind of fill a room with these little stools, right? So what I'm going to do is go to my Mesh network shelf. You could also go to effects and you'll find a mesh over here, and we can go create mesh network. We can go into the properties. You could see that we have a lot of options here just for default setup, but for now we're just going to leave it at default, and I'm just going to press a button on the shelf, but we just want to create a mesh network. And as you can see, Mesh went ahead and duplicated this table several times. Alright, so we got, it's one mesh now, but it seems to have duplicated many times. Now the thing is, this is where things are going to get interesting and fun. So firstly, let's look at the connection that's being made. I can open up my node editor just so you can see what's going on in the background. We'll do this. So what I have is my mesh network. I got a node called distribute node, the mesh network node, the repo node. This is basically telling Maya what to bring in. We got our position node, and we have our shape node, which is this thing here. So if I open and look at my shapes over here, these all pumped in to my instance geo port over here. So if I open that, you can see it's just ported into there. So that's what's happening in the background. And this is the repo shape. So the repo shape is basically, this is spitting out a polygon shape that is then being fed back. Whatever now I'm going to run through the repo node, it's going to update this shape and so on. Okay, so that's what's happening in the background. Let's actually look at what's going on in our interface. So firstly, we have our original mesh over here, and I could move it up and down. Nothing's going to happen. The only thing that's going to happen is if I rotate it, scale it, so I could scale it down, so it would be something like that, and that's about it. I cannot do much to it. What I can do is, because this is in the original mesh, I could go ahead and change the original mesh. Let's say I want the legs shorter, so I can do this. In a minute I change the original mesh, because this is an instance, all the rest are going to change. So I could even add details. So for example, I can grab this and add a bevel, and all the other mesh, all the instances are going to have that change. So let me just add a division in there, and you can see that's now all divided. So it's a very powerful tool just because we can work on one object and it's going to change a whole lot of objects live on the go. I'm going to select my repo mesh and press Control A, and you'll see here in the attribute editor we'll have a whole lot of nodes, and let's just go over them quickly. This is the repo mode node, the one that we saw before over here. No, that's because this is the repo node. You see, as I choose it here in the editor, we're going to see its outputs. So we're going to see the mesh network, which is going to let us connect more nodes or create more nodes. Our distribution node is the one that's actually controlling the amount of copies right now. And then there's just the shader that's put onto it, or the group node in this case. So if we look here at our, let me just lock this, so there we go. So the repo node, back to the repo node. The repo node is basically what is calling up the meshes. I can now bring in another mesh. So let me just create, just for the heck of it, let's say one of these smart materials, and let's just change some of its attributes because we can. So we can make it smaller. Let's see. I'm not sure like what these, each one of these are just slightly different. So that's its radius. Here we go. This has some sort of change. I'm just going to do this. Ah, there we go. That's doing something to it. Ooh, there we go. So we have this really weird shape. If I grab the repo node now, so if we go here, Control A, grab the repo node, I can just middle mouse drag that shape into here, and that will add it eventually to the distribution. Now, right now we can't see it, but we will see. And as you can see in the repo mode, repo node, you can see that each one of these objects that I added into the repo node has a number. So it starts off with 0, 1, and so on. That's because of coding language. Coding always counts objects or syntax from 0 onward. So this kind of does the same. All right, moving on. Let me just choose that so it gets smaller. All right, so the next one is my mesh node, which is this node here. It's the same. This one will allow me to create all of these fancy options that we have here that we can add to our mesh and make it become fancier and fancier. For now, let's just skip over this because we'll talk about this a lot later. Let's look at our distribution node. A distribution node is the default node that is connected, and we can decide like the amount of object distributed along it. And what it does, it creates an object, and then after a certain distance it will create another object and then fill that gap with as many objects as I like. So in this case we're talking about the distance on X, so I can actually pull out, let's say 60 of these, let's say 60 units, which will make it 60 centimeters, and then pull that back so we have 9 objects that will fit that distance. All right, so that's pretty cool, and the distribution node is very powerful. We can now make it radial, so I can have these guys, you know, in a radial pattern. I can change my radial pattern to be, let's say, YZ or ZX. We can get rid of the up node so it still keeps everything straight, and then we can do stuff like this. Really cool stuff. I mean, it's unending what you can do with this. with that being said, we are going to end the video here, and when we come back, we'll look at creating something like chainmail or a chain of some sorts using the distribution node. So, see you soon. In the previous section, we looked at what builds up a mesh network, and now we're actually going to see how to use it. So from now on, what you're going to see is me starting from scratch, and then we're just going to kind of roll into like the end result. So in this case, I want to kind of create a chainmail, or let's just start off with something simpler. How about we create just something that will be like a chain, some sort of chain that we can later on use in, let's say, dynamics if I wanted to. So I'm just going to create a torus because for every chain we need our torus. Here we go. This will be our first object in our chain. Again, I haven't done this before, so just bear with me. Let's do 16 by 8 just so our meshes are going to be light enough. Let's make the radius 2, and let's see, let's make the thickness a little thinner so we have these nice thin chain thingies. Alright, I'm going to change the mesh a bit, so I'm going to press B and make it so I'm almost catching everything, like the distribution of the weight is going all the way until the middle, but not all the way there. And I'm just going to kind of bend it like so, about 15 degrees, maybe a little less. Maybe we should make this bigger. Let's make that a little bigger anyway, like so. Yeah, something like that, and then we'll grab this and go the opposite direction. So we got like this bent thing, and now I can smooth it out, so like that. All right. So all in all, we have this very simple shape. Now what I want to do is just use a distribute node and try to get these to link up to each other. So let's just create a mesh network, and voila, we're done. We can go home. All right, and that's very cool. We can actually have a lot more control than what we've used so far. So I'm going to go to my distribute node, and this in this case 10 is quite cool, so I'm just going to move them out so they're almost touching, because if this was dynamics, what you want is to have them almost touching. So if I made these dynamic now and then release them, they'll kind of lock into each other. Next, how about we make this into a chainmail? So to add, if you notice up to now, if I now take this and move it up and down on any one of these, we can even twist these. So let's do that. That's pretty cool. If I wanted to now distribute to the left or right, I basically cannot do that because it's just the way it said it. I could do radial, I can do spherical, I can do all kind of, options here. But by default, it just distributes it along a line on one of the axes. So I can even have it just on, let's say, the Z, and bring back this. So now we'll go along the Z instead. So that's basically what we can do with the distribute node. So just undo, undo, undo. All right. So now that we have this, I probably need a new node that's gonna kind of add on, like pack them up going this way, right? So I can have these guys fill up that area. So to do that, I'm going to need a different type of node. So let's go to the mesh node over here and look at the options that it's going to give us to call up one of these nodes. And you can see we got this node over here that's called a replicator. All right, so if I press that and go add replicator and now start adding, you can see I can add as many as I want on a different axis, in this case on the Z axis. Now I can also, unlike before that this is adding, unlike the distribute node which looks at a distance and then fills the gap, this one will just add on taking in consideration a distance from when to create. So in this case we want to kind of pull it like so. So now I have this chainmail sheet like so. Cool? Cool. So all in all, we've made a very quick chainmail just using two nodes. We use the default distributed node and then use the replicator to create the sheet. Alright, so when we come back, we'll look at creating, let's say, something a little more complex using the same idea. Alright, we're back. Well, I think the previous one went pretty well. Alright, so this one we're actually going to take the same idea from before, take this armored mask here, and instead of this section over here, we're going to create like chainmail going all around. So I got this off of the content browser. Just as you open it, go down to clothing and you probably can find that. We could probably should be using this tank top, but I thought this would be kind of cool. So let's have a look at that. So so how are we going to do this? Well, firstly, I would like to, what should we do here? Smooth it out. Let's see. Yeah, smooth it out. That worked pretty well. Alright, so here I sped this up because I didn't want you to go through this whole modeling process, but basically what I've done is create a split, so I could split the mesh into half by duplicating it and then deleting the top half, and on the duplicate deleting the bottom half, and then basically fix the mesh up. The bottom half, I had to make sure that it would be divided equally along the mesh, and made sure that it wasn't double-sided, so there was only just one part of that mesh. And in this speed up video you could see me actually do that. So when we will be done with this, the next step is to create the chainmail and then have it applied onto this mesh. Stage I'll probably even smooth it out a bit, so we're gonna go to, what should we do? We want to go to object mode and smooth. Alright, so now we should have enough to create our chainmail. Alright, whoa. Took us 6 minutes, but we kind of did that. We created the thing that we would use for chainmail. Now, in the olden times, what we would do simply is make this dynamic and put a texture on it. And hooray, we had chainmail. But what if we can actually make chainmail? So I already have my loop here. And let me just pause this and save. All right, so what I want to do is actually take this guy and duplicate it, and just like before when we created that that mesh network just on the grid, now I'm going to use this material, this face here, to kind of distribute them along its faces. So kind of cool, don't you think? I do. Alright, so first what we need our chain and make a distribute node. Alright, then we want to tell it to use a guide, which in this case we want a mesh. Now it's asking input the mesh. So I need my outliner open for this. And remember we created this mesh helper. And I'm just going to drag and drop that in. And voila, these guys are now distributed along that mesh. Cool. But we don't want it this way. We kind of want it to set to the center of each face. So I'm going to do that. And then I'm going to say flood the mesh. So I'm going to use this flood the mesh checkbox. And there we go. So we flooded the mesh. And now all I need to do is scale down this guy until I get, oh, I overdid it, until I get the correct size. Now it really depends on how you set up this mesh. It should work pretty nicely. So there we go. I think that's pretty cool. Now because there is so much data here, I can now go and say, well, I don't need that. Let me just select this here. Now, the reason that everything's bunching up is that everything's really close here. So I don't need this much mesh for what I need for that chainmail. So I'm gonna go to every second one to about yay far and just delete it. And do the same on the other side. So we want every second one until there, and then delete it, like so. And we could do the same for the bottom one. Just delete. And yeah, that should be okay. So now if we unisolate select, you can see we have a lot less chainmail over there. Now again, you can go and do this a lot better. I'm sure there are better ways of doing, of making this mesh, let's say equal along its edges. But here, very simply, Control H, I created this chainmail almost instantaneously without any too much hassle. Now I could go and do kind of cool things to this, but this section is 10 minutes long and I'm going to stop here, and when we come back we're going to look at how we can manipulate this chainmail to kind of look a little weird. So off we go. Alright, we're back. So in the previous video we set up this chainmail, and now let's see what we can do to it to kind of break it up so it's not so even. Well, as we were looking at Mesh, we can see that we got a lot of options here. So let's just look at our distribute node before we go on to other nodes. So with distribute node we have, let's say, ignore maps. And then we can go and change, let's say, let me just get rid of rotations, and let's say, I could say, you know, just mess with the scaling of this, you know, maybe rotate them differently and have them like just kind of break. But you don't really have much control over that, I've found, in this kind of case, and maybe in other cases. But we can go and add some more nodes on top of this that will allow us to kind of manipulate the way that this behaves. One of these is an offset node, and the offset node is pretty cool, so let's just add one. What it will allow us to do is, let's say, offset every other one, let's say on the Y, let's say by 90 degrees. And what it will do is take each one of these guys here and then change their rotation by 90 degrees all together in one go. But we can also go and stagger that, so you know, maybe some do and some don't, you know, and that will kind of help us break up behavior. I could even say position, let's say position on the Y. Let's give it, let's say, 20 odd ones, or let's say it's too much. Let's do 10. And notice I'm starting to break up the behavior here. So this maybe 10 is too much. Let's make that 5, so it's a little subtler. Then let's make that 12 on the rotations. And just by doing these little tiny tweaks on this, we can break up the behavior. We can also create, let's see, lower clamp. What does this do? Lower clamp. We can clamp like an area where it's being affected. We can tell it do not, change the position or the rotation. Let's say we don't want the rotation to be affected, but we do want the scale to be affected, and we can do that. All right, so that's the offset node. But let's say the offset node is not what I want, and I've changed my mind. Well, because this is a node-based thing, we can actually remove nodes and replace them with others. And to do that, we can go to our mesh over here and go into the mesh editor, and we'll open up this little tiny UI. You could also get to it from the shelf over here. And what we can do is I can mute the effect or turn it on, or even remove it altogether. So goodbye. All right, let's try a different effect. Let's try a randomize effect. So we can use a randomize and, oh no, it's exploded. Now, the cool thing is that I can now turn off all of this. And let's say, again, I want to kind of move those in a random position, and then I can stagger it. So, just randomize breakages of the mesh here. And we can really play around with this quite a lot and get really nice effects. I could even use a texture to kind of have this work. So let's say, let's just create a noise. And because we need black and white, so I'm going to make the ratio 0 and this to about 50. And you can see already there's like starting to be behavior here and then we can change the frequency, so, and just because I'm playing with that, it's giving me a little breakage on that duplication, so it doesn't look as so much the same. Let me just change the background a bit so you guys can see. So over here I have a tear. We can, let's go back over here. So here under the stagger, I added that map. And we can, up it. So everything's a lot more staggered. All right, and with that, I'm going to wrap this up. We're going to move on to other things. We're going to look at some text now, and then we're going to come back and play around with Mash to create other effects and see what else we can do with this. So let's see what else we can do.